Humanity's battle fleet entered the war zone and erased them from existence instantly. The Grand Council chamber of the Andaris Concordat was a huge room shaped like a circle, with seats rising in rings toward the ceiling. Hundreds of alien delegates sat in those rings. Some had scales, some had fur, some had no skin at all, only thin plates of bone. They came from 100 worlds and spoke 100 languages, but a small device on each chair translated every word into a common tongue. Today the chamber was almost silent. Only one voice spoke, and it was shaking. Elder Sael Thorn stood at the center platform. She was a Veyran, a tall being with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed made for sadness. Behind her, a screen showed images from her homeworld: burning cities, broken towers, long lines of refugees walking across gray fields under a sky full of smoke. "My people have lived in peace for 3,000 years, Sael said. "We do not build weapons of war. We build libraries. We build schools. We build gardens. And now the Kral Dominion is erasing us from the stars, one city at a time." She looked around at the rings of alien faces. Many looked away. "I am asking this council for help, not for money, not for words, for ships, for soldiers, for anyone willing to stand between my people and the guns of the Kral." For a long moment nobody answered. Then a delegate from the Threll Assembly, a species with hard silver shells, spoke through his translator box. "The Kral Dominion has never lost a war," he said. "Their fleets number in the thousands. If we send ships to help the Veyrans, the Kral will turn their guns on us next. I am sorry, Elder Thorn, but this council cannot risk the destruction of 100 worlds to save one." Other delegates nodded. A few whispered to each other. Nobody stood to disagree. Sael Thorn's shoulders dropped. She had expected this answer. She had heard it before, from other councils, other assemblies. Everyone was afraid of the Kral Dominion, and fear made even kind people turn away. She was about to step down from the platform when a quiet voice spoke from the lowest ring of seats, the ring reserved for the newest members of the Concordat. "Elder Thorn, may I ask a question?" Every head turned. The voice belonged to a human. His name was Thomas Reyes, the ambassador from Earth. He was not old, but there was something calm and careful about the way he sat, like a man who was used to watching more than talking. Humanity had only joined the Concordat 11 years earlier. Most delegates barely noticed them. Humans had no great fleet, no famous victories, no history that anyone in the galaxy cared to remember. They were, in the eyes of most of the council, a small and unimportant species that happened to have discovered how to build a warp drive. Sael Thorn blinked in surprise. "You may ask, Ambassador." "How many worlds have you lost so far?" "4, she said quietly. "And a 5th is under attack even as I speak." Thomas nodded slowly. He did not say anything else. He simply looked down at the small device on his wrist, as if checking the time, and then looked back up at her. "Thank you, Elder Thorn," he said. "I have heard enough." The Threll delegate laughed, a dry rattling sound. "What can the humans possibly do? You have what, 12 warships? The Kral have 12,000. Thomas did not answer the insult. He simply stood, bowed his head slightly to Sael Thorn, and walked out of the chamber without another word. Far from the council chamber, on a planet called Earth, in an office deep underground, a woman named Fleet Admiral Elena Voss read a message that had just arrived from the Concordat station. She read it twice, then she called her aide. "Get me a channel to the Joint Command," she said. "Tell them it's the Veyran situation. Tell them Ambassador Reyes says it's time." Her aide hesitated. "Time for what, Admiral?" Elena Voss looked at the star map on the wall of her office. It showed the whole nearby section of the galaxy, with human space marked in blue, a small little corner, compared to the vastness that belonged to older, larger species. But there was another color on that map too, a deep red, marking places humans did not talk about openly, places where secret shipyards had worked for over 60 years, building something the rest of the galaxy did not know existed. "Time to stop hiding," she said. To understand why Elena Voss said those words, one has to go back 60 years, long before humans ever met the Veyrans, or the Kral Dominion, or anyone else among the stars. Humanity's first contact with alien life had not been peaceful. It had not been the way the old movies imagined it, with music and open hands. The first alien ships to reach Earth's solar system belonged to a species called the Morvax, hunters who saw new worlds only as resources to take. They attacked without warning. They burned 3 human colonies on Mars before anyone even understood what was happening. Humanity fought back with what it had, which was almost nothing. Millions died. Whole cities were lost. For nearly 10 years, it looked like the Morvax would finish what they started, and humanity would end as a footnote in some alien history book, one more species wiped out before it had the chance to grow up. But humans did something the Morvax did not expect. They did not surrender, and they did not stop building. Every scientist, every factory, every mind on Earth turned toward one goal: survival. In secret bunkers and hidden shipyards, humanity built weapons and ships far beyond anything they had before the war. They learned to think differently, to design differently, driven by simple desperation. In the end, humanity did not just survive the Morvax. They destroyed the invading fleet completely, using tactics and machines that shocked even their own commanders. After that terrible war, humanity made a choice. They would join the wider galaxy carefully, quietly. They would show the Concordat a peaceful face, a small fleet of ordinary ships, while behind closed doors they kept building, learning, preparing. Nobody in the galaxy knew about Battlefleet Sol, the true fleet, built from lessons paid for in blood. Nobody knew that humanity had spent 60 years refusing to ever again be caught unprepared. Elena Voss had grown up hearing these stories from her grandmother, who had lived through the Morvax War as a young engineer. "We do not go looking for fights," her grandmother used to say. "But if a fight finds someone we care about, we do not do it halfway." Elena thought about those words now as she waited for the Joint Command to answer her call. The response came within the hour. It was not from a general or a president. It came from the Joint Command Council itself, the small group of leaders from every human nation who together decided matters of war and peace. Their message was short. Authorization granted. Battlefleet Sol is released for deployment. Rules of engagement. Protect the Veyron people. Minimize unnecessary destruction. But if the Kral Dominion chooses to fight, Admiral, you are not to hold back. Elena Voss closed her eyes for a moment. This was the moment her whole career, her whole life, had been pointed toward, even if she had not always known it. She opened a new channel, this one to a hidden shipyard orbiting the far side of Jupiter, a place with no name on any public star chart. On the screen, hundreds of dark shapes floated in the black of space, ships larger and stranger than anything the Concordat had ever seen from humanity. These were not the friendly little transport ships humans showed the galaxy. These were warships built from 6 decades of hard-earned knowledge, ships that could bend light around themselves, ships with weapons that did not simply damage a target, but unmade it. "This is Fleet Admiral Voss," she said. "Battlefleet Sol, this is not a drill. Prepare for departure. Set course for Veyron space. We have people to save." Across 100 ships, alarms began to sound. Not the alarms of danger, but the alarms of purpose. Crews who had trained for years without ever expecting to be called moved quickly and calmly to their stations. There was no panic. There was only readiness. Back on the Concordat station, Ambassador Thomas Reyes stood at the observation window of his quarters, looking out at the stars. He had spent 11 years in that council chamber, smiling politely, saying little, watching the other species underestimate his people again and again. It had never bothered him. It had, in fact, been the plan. His communicator chimed. He answered it, and Elena Voss's face appeared on the small screen. "It's happening," she said. "Fleet Sol is moving. We'll reach Veyron space in 9 days." Thomas allowed himself a small smile, the first real one in a long while. 9 days. The Kral Dominion has no idea what 9 days from now will look like. "Do you think the Council will understand once they see?" Thomas thought about the Threll delegate's dry laugh, about the way the whole chamber had looked away from Sale Thorne's tears. "Some will," he said. "Some never will, no matter what they see. But that's not why we're doing this." "No," Elena agreed. "We're doing this because Sale Thorne asked, and because nobody else in that whole chamber was willing to answer." She ended the call and turned to her bridge crew, who were already watching her, waiting. "Set course," she said. "Full fleet formation. Let's go meet the Kral Dominion." The great ships of Battlefleet Sol turned together, silent and dark against the stars, and began the long journey toward a war that the rest of the galaxy did not yet understand. Humanity was about to end. Far away on a Veyran world under siege, Elder Sale Thorne stood on a balcony watching fires burn across the horizon, not knowing that help was already on its way. She did not know about the hidden shipyards, or the Morvax War, or the 60 years of secret preparation. All she knew was that one small, quiet ambassador had listened to her when no one else would. She did not know it yet, but that had been enough. Humanity's battle fleet entered the war zone and erased them from existence instantly. The journey to Veyran space took 9 days, and for the crews of Battlefleet Sol, those 9 days felt like 9 years. Aboard the flagship, a massive vessel named the Constellation, Fleet Admiral Elena Voss walked the long central corridor every morning, stopping to speak with her crew. She was not a woman who liked to sit alone in her command chair while others worked. She wanted to know the names of the young engineers, the nervous new pilots, the old veterans who had waited decades for a call like this one. "You scared, Lieutenant?" she asked a young woman checking weapon systems in the forward bay. "A little, Admiral," the lieutenant admitted. "I've trained for this my whole life, but I never thought it would actually happen." Elena nodded. "That's normal. Being scared means you understand what's at stake. Just don't let it slow your hands." The lieutenant smiled and went back to her work, a little steadier than before. Elena kept walking. She thought about her grandmother again, about the stories of the Morvax War, about ships that burned and cities that fell before humanity learned to fight back. She thought about Sale Thorne's face on the screen back in the council chamber, and the burning cities behind her. Elena had seen war before, in training simulations and old records, but she had never led real ships into a real war. Today, that would change. While Battlefleet Sol traveled through the dark, the war in Veyran space grew worse. The Kral Dominion was not simply a powerful species. It was a species built entirely around conquest. Every young Kral was raised to believe that strength was the only truth in the universe, and that weaker species existed only to be taken over or destroyed. Their warships were massive, covered in thick armor plating, bristling with cannons the size of buildings. Their soldiers did not fear death, because Kral culture taught that dying in battle was the greatest honor a warrior could earn. Warlord Drakor Van commanded the Kral fleet, attacking the Veyran homeworld. He was a huge being, nearly 9 feet tall, with gray skin like stone, and eyes that glowed faint orange when he was angry. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bloodspire, watching reports of the battle scroll across his screen. "Another city has fallen," an officer reported. "The Veyrans offer almost no resistance." Drakor grunted. "Weak, just as I expected. This species builds gardens instead of guns. They deserve to lose their world to those strong enough to take it." "Warlord, there is a report from our scout patrol near the outer edge of the system," another officer said, sounding uncertain. "They encountered unknown ships, small numbers. The patrol has stopped responding." Drakor turned slowly. "Unknown ships? Explain." "We do not have clear data, Warlord. The last transmission mentioned strange readings, engines unlike anything in our records." "Then all contact was lost." Drakor's orange eyes narrowed. "Pirates, perhaps. Or scavengers hoping to steal from the battlefield. Send a stronger patrol. I want answers." "Yes, Warlord." Drakor turned back to the screen showing the burning Veyran city. He did not think much more about the missing patrol. In 60 years of conquest, the Kral Dominion had never faced an enemy fleet it could not crush within hours. He saw no reason to believe today would be different. He was wrong, though he would not understand how wrong until it was far too late. The unknown ships, the frightened Kral officer mentioned, belonged to the lead scouting group of Battlefleet Sol, 3 small stealth vessels sent ahead of the main fleet to gather information. Their commander, Captain Mikhail Torres, watched from the bridge of his ship, the Whisper, as a squad of 6 Kral cruisers approached his position, weapons already charging. "They found us. his sensor officer said. 6 ships, heavy weapons, moving to intercept. Copy that, Mikhail said calmly. Hold position. Let's see what they do. The Kral ships opened fire almost immediately, without any warning or attempt at communication. Massive energy cannons blasted toward the 3 human scout ships, enough firepower to destroy an entire fleet of ordinary vessels. But the Whisper and her sister ships did not explode. Around each ship, a shimmer of light bent and folded the incoming fire around them, like water flowing around a stone. The Kral weapons simply did not connect. Not one shot landed. Shields holding at 100%, the sensor officer reported, sounding almost surprised, even though he had trained for exactly this. They can't touch us. Return fire, Mikhail ordered. Minimum force, disable only. 3 beams of pale blue light lanced out from the human ships, and it was over in seconds. The beams did not simply damage the 6 Kral cruisers. They unmade them, taking apart the matter of the hulls at a level the Kral had no instruments to even measure. The ships did not explode into fire and debris the way a ship destroyed by normal weapons would. They simply stopped being there, vanishing into scattered dust that drifted silently in the void. Mikhail watched the empty space where 6 warships had been only moments before. He felt no joy in it, only a grim kind of relief. Send the report back to Admiral Voss, he said quietly. Tell her the Kral know we're here now, and tell her they have no idea what they're dealing with. Back on the Bloodspire, Warlord Drakhor Van received a very different report than the one he expected. His new patrol group, 6 of his best cruisers, had gone silent completely. No wreckage, no distress signal, no survivors, simply gone. For the first time in a long while, Drakhor felt something unfamiliar creep into his mind. Not fear, he told himself. Kral warriors did not feel fear. But something close to it, a question he did not like asking. Show me everything we have on these humans, he ordered. His officers pulled every scrap of information the Kral Dominion possessed about the small, quiet species from the council chamber records. It was almost nothing, a handful of small colonies, a tiny fleet of unremarkable transport ships, no history of major wars, no known advanced weapons. This cannot be them, Drakhor said, staring at images of ordinary human cargo vessels. These ships are nothing. There must be another explanation. Pirates using stolen technology, perhaps. He wanted to believe that. It was easier to believe that than to consider the alternative, that a species his intelligence reports called harmless and unimportant had just destroyed 6 of his cruisers without losing a single ship of their own. Warlord, an officer said carefully, long-range sensors have detected a large fleet entering the system. Formation size, approximately 100 vessels. Origin coordinates match the direction the human ambassador's homeworld lies. Drakhor stood very still for a moment. Then his orange eyes flared with anger. Not fear, he insisted to himself. Only anger. 100 ships against my 12,000, he said. Whatever games these humans think they are playing, they have made a fatal mistake. Prepare the full battle fleet. We will crush this human fleet so completely that the galaxy will remember it as a warning to any other species foolish enough to interfere with the Kral Dominion. Aboard the Constellation, Elena Voss received Mikhail Torres's report with a quiet nod. She had expected the first contact to go this way. It was, in truth, a small mercy that the Kral had fired first. It meant there would be no confusion later about who started this fight. Send a message to the Kral Dominion Command, she told her communications officer. Direct and clear, no threats, just the truth. The message went out on every frequency the Kral Dominion used, broadcast across the Warzone for any who wished to listen. This is Fleet Admiral Elena Voss, of the human battle fleet Sol. Your forces have attacked the Varen people without cause and without mercy. We are here to end that. Withdraw your fleet from Varen space immediately, and no further harm will come to you. Continue this war, and we will stop you by whatever means are necessary. This is not a threat. This is a fact. You have 1 hour to respond. Across the war zone, on ships and stations and worlds, every species watching that battle held its breath, waiting to see what the mighty Kral Dominion would do in answer to a fleet 100 times smaller than their own. They did not have to wait long. Warlord Dracor Van's answer came not as words, but as 12,000 Kral warships turning their engines toward the edge of the system, moving to meet Battlefleet Sol in open battle, confident that within hours, the arrogant little human fleet would be nothing but dust among the stars. He had no idea that he had just made the greatest mistake of his long and violent life. On the bridge of the constellation, Elena Voss watched the sensor display fill with the red dots of 12,000 approaching enemy ships. She took a slow breath, then turned to her crew, her voice calm and steady. "They didn't take the offer," she said. "All right, battle stations. Every ship, hold formation. We do this the way we trained." Across the whole of Battlefleet Sol, 100 human warships, built from 60 years of hard lessons and quiet patience, moved into position and waited for the storm to arrive. Humanity's battle fleet entered the war zone and erased them from existence instantly. 12,000 Kral warships moved through the dark like a wall of iron and fire, engines glowing bright orange against the black of space. From the bridge of the Bloodspire, Warlord Dracor Van watched the formation stretch out ahead of him, ship after ship after ship, more firepower than most civilizations would ever see gathered in one place. Facing them, 100 human ships held their line at the edge of the system, small and quiet, showing no sign of retreat. "They are not running," an officer said, sounding almost confused. "Warlord, should we not expect them to flee once they see our numbers?" Dracor's orange eyes stayed fixed on the human formation. Something about their stillness bothered him, though he could not explain why. "Let them stand there," he said. "It will not save them. Begin the attack. Full weapons range in 3 minutes." Across the vast Kral fleet, thousands of massive cannons began charging, drawing enough power to light up entire cities. The Kral Dominion had crushed 100 worlds with this kind of overwhelming force, and Dracor saw no reason to expect anything different today. Aboard the Constellation, Elena Voss stood in the center of her bridge, watching the same sensor display, but seeing something very different than fear. "Sensor lock complete on the entire enemy fleet," her tactical officer reported. "All 12,000 vessels mapped and targeted." "All of them?" a younger officer asked quietly, unable to hide the disbelief in his voice. "All of them," the tactical officer confirmed. "The arrays had 3 minutes to work. Every ship, every weak point, every engine core. We have it all." Elena nodded slowly. This was the moment 60 years of quiet work had been built toward. Not conquest. Not revenge, simply the ability to end a fight before it could truly begin, so that fewer people, on either side, would have to die. "Admiral," her communications officer said, "the Kral fleet is entering weapons range. They have not responded to any further hails." "They made their choice back on Veros," Elena said quietly. "All ships, this is Fleet Admiral Voss. Deploy the Aegis array. Full spread. Minimum yield required for fleet neutralization. We are not here to kill more than we have to. Just enough to end this." Across Battlefleet Sol, 100 ships opened hidden panels along their hulls, and from each one, dozens of small drone-like devices launched silently into the dark, spreading out ahead of the fleet like a net cast across the stars. On the Bloodspire, the Kral fleet's cannons finished charging. Dracor Van raised a clawed hand. "Fire," he said. 12,000 ships unleashed their weapons at once, a wave of destructive energy so massive it lit up the space between the two fleets like a second sun. To any outside observer, it looked like nothing could possibly survive such an attack. But the wave never reached the human ships. The small drones that Battlefleet Sol had launched moments earlier activated together, forming a vast, invisible lattice of energy between the two fleets. The Kral weapons fire struck that lattice and simply stopped. The destructive energy captured and unwound into harmless light, like a wave breaking against an unseen shore. On the Bloodspire's bridge, officers stared at their screens in stunned silence. "Impact readings, 0, one officer said, his voice shaking. "Warlord, our attack did not reach them. It did not reach them at all." Dracor's orange eyes widened, the first true flicker of fear he had felt in decades. "Fire again," he ordered. "Full power, every weapon, now." The Kral fleet fired again and again, pouring more destructive energy into open space than had ever been used in a single battle in that region of the galaxy. Every single shot was caught and unwound by the human lattice, as if the greatest weapons of the Kral Dominion were nothing more than raindrops falling on a rooftop. Aboard the Constellation, Elena Voss watched the enemy's wasted firepower with a steady, quiet gaze. She had studied every record of Kral conquests, every account of worlds burned and species erased, and she felt no satisfaction in what was about to happen, only a grim sense of duty. "They're not going to stop," she said. "All right, it's time. Tactical. Execute erasure protocol. Target the full enemy fleet." This was the technology that 60 years of secret work had built, technology born from humanity's darkest hour during the Morvax War, when human scientists first discovered how to unravel the very structure of matter at its smallest level, turning a weapon of destruction into something far stranger and far more absolute. It did not burn a ship or break it apart with force. It reached into the fundamental pattern that held the ship together and simply erased that pattern, turning solid matter into scattered dust in less time than it took to blink. Humanity had built this weapon only because it had once nearly ceased to exist. It had held its secret for 60 years because such power demanded restraint, and because no one wanted to be the species that showed the galaxy something so terrifying without absolute need. Today, that need had finally come. "Erasure protocol armed and ready," the tactical officer said, her voice tight with the weight of what was about to happen. "Awaiting your order, Admiral." Elena Voss thought of Sale Thorne's tears in the council chamber. She thought of burning Veyron cities and long lines of refugees. She thought of the 6 Kral cruisers that had fired first, without warning, without mercy, on her own scout ships. She thought of 100 worlds the Kral Dominion had already destroyed before humanity ever arrived to stop them. "Fire," she said quietly. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. Across the vast expanse of space between the two fleets, invisible waves of energy swept outward from the 100 human ships, passing silently through the 12,000 vessels of the Kral Dominion battle fleet. There was no explosion, no fire, no sound at all in the vacuum of space. One moment, the largest war fleet in that entire region of the galaxy stretched from one end of the sensor display to the other, a wall of iron and might that had never known defeat. The next moment, it was gone. Not destroyed in the way ships are usually destroyed, torn apart into burning wreckage and drifting debris, simply gone, as if it had never existed at all. Where 12,000 warships had been, there was now only empty space, and a faint shimmer of scattered particles, all that remained of ships, weapons, and the countless Kral soldiers who had crewed them. On the Bloodspire, alarms screamed across every console, as the ship's own systems tried and failed to explain what had just happened to the fleet around them. Warlord Dracor Van stood frozen at his command station, staring at a sensor display that now showed nothing where his entire war fleet had been only seconds before. "Status," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Someone give me a status report." No one answered. The bridge crew of the Bloodspire stared at their screens in horror, unable to process what their instruments were telling them. Ships that had fought and won 100 battles across 60 years of Kral conquest, gone in less time than it took to draw a single breath. "Warlord," a trembling officer finally managed. "The fleet. The entire fleet. It isn't just destroyed. There's nothing left. No debris. No wreckage. It's like it was erased." Dracor Van, who had never once in his long life known real fear, felt it now, cold and absolute, settling into his stone-gray chest. He looked out through the viewport at the empty space where his glory and his power had stood only moments before, and for the first time, he understood that he had made a mistake he could never undo. Aboard the Constellation, the bridge was silent except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. No one cheered, no one celebrated. Elena Voss stood very still, watching the empty space on the sensor display where 12,000 ships had been. "Confirm status of the enemy flagship," she said quietly. "The Bloodspire remains intact, Admiral," the tactical officer reported. "It was outside the primary erasure radius. All other Kral vessels are gone." Elena closed her eyes for just a moment. This was not a victory she wanted to feel proud of. It was simply the price of stopping something worse. "Open a channel to the Bloodspire," she said. When the channel connected, she saw Warlord Dracor Van standing on his bridge, surrounded by stunned officers, his usual fierce confidence replaced by something close to shock. "Warlord Van," Elena said, her voice calm but firm, "your fleet is gone. Your war on the Varen people ends today. You may return what remains of your forces to Kral Dominion space, and we will not pursue you. But if you or anyone under your command attacks the Varens, or any other people under humanity's protection, ever again, what happened here today will happen to you as well." Dracor Van said nothing for a long moment. He simply stared at the human woman on his screen, this quiet, calm commander of a species his people had dismissed as weak and unimportant. What are you?" he finally asked, his voice hollow. Elena Voss thought of her grandmother, of the Morvax War, of 60 years of quiet patience and hidden preparation, all so that this exact moment could happen without needing to happen ever again. "We are the ones who learned, a long time ago, exactly what it costs to be unprepared," she said. "Go home, Warlord, and tell your people what you saw here today." The channel closed. On the bridge of the constellation, Elena Voss finally allowed herself a slow, tired breath and looked out at the quiet stars, knowing that everything in the galaxy had just changed forever. Humanity's battle fleet entered the war zone and erased them from existence instantly. News of what happened in Varen space spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. It moved through communication relays, through trading posts, through the Concordat's own information network, until within a single day, almost every major species in that part of the galaxy had heard some version of the story. A fleet of 12,000 Kral warships, the largest and most feared military force in the region, had been erased in less than 4 seconds by a fleet of only 100 human ships. Most species did not believe it at first. Then the survivors from the Bloodspire and its escort ships began telling their story, and sensor recordings from independent trading vessels near the war zone confirmed every detail. The Kral Dominion, undefeated for 60 years, had lost its entire battle fleet in the time it took to blink. In the Grand Council chamber of the Andaris Concordat, the mood was very different from the day Sail Thorn had stood alone and been turned away. "It cannot be true," the Threll delegate said, the same one who had laughed at the idea of human help only weeks earlier. His silver shell seemed to have lost some of its shine. 12,000 ships, gone, in 4 seconds. "It is true," said another delegate, a scholar from a species that had studied warp signatures for centuries. "My people have confirmed the sensor data ourselves. There is no mistake." A murmur ran through the chamber, rising into a wave of nervous conversation. Species who had ignored the small, quiet human ambassador for 11 years now turned to look at Thomas Reyes, sitting in his usual seat in the lowest ring, exactly where he always sat. He did not stand, he did not smile. He simply waited, the same calm expression on his face that he always wore. Finally, the chamber quieted, and the presiding officer, an elderly being from the Threll Assembly's oldest family, spoke directly to him. "Ambassador Reyes," she said, her voice careful, "the Concordat would like to formally ask your government to explain the nature and origin of this weapon." Thomas rose slowly. "I can tell you some of it," he said, "not because the Concordat demands it, but because I believe the galaxy deserves honesty, especially now." He told them, in simple words, about the Morvax War, about the near destruction of humanity, generations ago, at the hands of a species that saw them only as prey, about the decades that followed, spent quietly rebuilding, quietly preparing, never again wanting to be caught helpless. "We did not build this technology to conquer," he said. "We built it because once, a long time ago, we very nearly ceased to exist, and we promised ourselves it would never happen again. We have kept that technology hidden, not out of secrecy for its own sake, but because such power should never be shown carelessly. We used it today because the alternative was allowing a species to erase the Varen people from the stars while everyone else in this chamber looked away." Silence followed his words. Even the Threll delegate, usually quick to speak, said nothing for a long moment. "Why tell us all this now?" the presiding officer finally asked. Because trust has to start somewhere, Thomas said, and because I would rather the galaxy understand who we are through honest words than through fear and rumor. Far from the council chamber, on the ruined surface of a Varen city, Elder Sael Thorn walked through streets that had been burning only days earlier. Human medical teams worked alongside Varen doctors, treating the wounded. Human engineers helped clear debris and rebuild broken water systems. There was no arrogance in how the humans worked, no sense that they expected gratitude or reward. They simply worked, quietly and steadily, the same way Elena Voss had walked the corridors of the constellation speaking to her frightened young crew. Sael found Elena standing near a fountain that had somehow survived the bombing, watching a group of Varen children play in its water for the first time in weeks. "Admiral Voss," Sael said, approaching slowly, "I do not know how to thank you. Words feel very small next to what your fleet has done for my people." Elena turned to her, and for the first time since the battle, something like a real smile touched her tired face. "You don't need to thank us, Elder Thorn. You asked for help when everyone else in that chamber turned away. That took more courage than anything we did out there." Sael looked out at the children playing. "The others are afraid of you now. All the species who once ignored humanity. I hear it in their voices when they speak of what happened in the Warzone." "I know," Elena said quietly. "That's not what we wanted. We didn't do this to make ourselves feared." "Perhaps not," Sael said. "But power like yours will always cause fear, whether you want it or not. What matters, I think, is what you choose to do with that fear. Whether you use it to rule over others, or whether you use it, as you did here, simply to stand beside those who have no one else to stand beside them." Elena said nothing for a moment, watching the children laugh in the fountain's water. "My grandmother used to say something like that," she finally said. "We don't go looking for fights, but if a fight finds someone we care about, we don't do it halfway." Sael Thorn smiled, the first true smile Elena had seen from her, since they had spoken over the communication channel weeks earlier. "Then perhaps the galaxy has gained a good friend today, even if it has also learned a hard lesson." Not everyone in the galaxy responded to the battle with fear or gratitude. Deep within Kral Dominion space, in a fortress city built into the side of a mountain range, the surviving leadership of the Dominion gathered in a dark chamber to decide what came next. Warlord Drakor Van stood before the Dominion's ruling council, his once proud posture now bent with the weight of failure. He had lost the largest fleet the Kral Dominion had ever assembled, and with it, he had lost the unquestioned fear that other species once held for his people. "The humans offer peace," Drakor said. "They will not pursue us further, so long as we end our war against the Varens, and never move against them or anyone under their protection again." A council elder, an ancient Kral, covered in ceremonial scars from battles fought centuries ago, rose slowly to speak. "And you believe we should accept this mercy from a species we called weak only weeks ago?" "I believe," Drakor said carefully, "that any Kral who saw what I saw would understand there is no dishonor in accepting the truth. We were not defeated by trickery or luck. We were defeated because this species possesses power beyond anything we have ever faced, and they chose, even in victory, not to destroy us completely. That restraint is not weakness. I believe it may be the only reason any of us are still alive to have this conversation." The chamber fell into uneasy silence. Some of the council members, younger and prouder, wanted immediate revenge, wanted to rebuild the fleet and strike back harder than before. But others, older and wiser, understood the weight of what Drakor was truly saying. The Kral Dominion had built its entire culture around the belief that strength always wins. Today, for the first time in living memory, a stronger force had shown them mercy, instead of using its full power to erase them from history entirely. "We will not forget this defeat," the ancient elder finally said. "But perhaps it is time the Kral Dominion learned there are forms of strength we have never understood. Send word to the humans. We accept their terms. For now." Drakor bowed his head, feeling a strange mixture of shame and quiet relief. He did not know if peace would truly hold. He did not know if some among his own people would try to seek revenge in secret, in years yet to come. But for today, at least, the killing on Veyran worlds would stop, and that alone felt like something worth accepting. Back aboard the Constellation, Elena Voss received the Kral Dominion's formal acceptance of peace with quiet satisfaction, though she did not celebrate. She had seen enough of war, even a war ended in 4 seconds, to know that peace was something that had to be tended carefully, like a small fire that could easily go out, or just as easily burn out of control if left unwatched. She called Thomas Reyes, who was still aboard the Concordat station, still fielding questions from delegates who suddenly wanted very much to understand humanity better than they ever had before. "How are things at the council?" she asked. Thomas allowed himself a tired laugh. "Let's just say I have never had so many species interested in scheduling a meeting with me. Everyone wants to know who we really are now." "And what do you tell them?" "The truth," Thomas said. "That we are not looking for an empire, that we simply want to live in this galaxy without ever again being caught helpless, the way we once were, and that we would rather be known as a species that helps its friends than one that conquers its enemies." Elena looked out at the stars beyond the constellation's viewport, thinking of the empty space where 12,000 ships had once been, and of the Veyron children laughing in a fountain that had survived the bombing. "Let's hope they believe you," she said quietly. "They will," Thomas said, "because now, for the first time, they have seen exactly what we could do, and exactly what we chose not to do instead." Humanity's battle fleet entered the war zone and erased them from existence instantly. 6 months after the battle in Veyron space, the Grand Council chamber of the Andaris Concordat looked much the same as it always had, rings of seats rising toward the ceiling, filled with delegates from 100 worlds. But something important had changed. The seat once given to humanity in the lowest, least important ring had been moved. Now Ambassador Thomas Reyes sat in the middle rings, among the older and more respected member species, a small but meaningful sign of how much the galaxy's view of humanity had shifted. Sael Thorne stood again at the center platform, but this time she did not come to beg for help. She came to speak of rebuilding, of new schools already rising from the ashes of burned cities, of gardens replanted, of a people slowly finding their way back to the peace they had known for 3,000 years before the Kral Dominion's war. "With the help of our human friends," she said, "and with a peace that is now held for 6 months, the Veyron people are recovering faster than any of us believed possible. I stand before this council today, not to ask for aid, but to give thanks, and to remind every species here that when we choose to act together, even the darkest war can be brought to an end." The chamber, once so quick to look away from her tears, now listened closely, many delegates nodding along with her words. After the session ended, Thomas Reyes found Sael Thorne near the great windows outside the chamber, looking out at the stars. "You've changed a great deal since the day I first saw you in this chamber," Thomas said. Sael smiled. "So has the way this council looks at your people. Tell me, Ambassador, do you ever grow tired of being underestimated?" Thomas laughed softly. "It has its uses. People show you their true selves when they think you're not worth watching closely. We learned a great deal about this galaxy in 11 years of being ignored. And now? Now, I suppose, we'll have to get used to being watched very closely indeed," Thomas said. "Which comes with its own challenges. Some species fear us. Some want alliances only because they hope our strength will protect them from their own enemies. A few, I think, simply want to understand us better, the way you did, right from the beginning." Sael considered this. "What will humanity do with all this new attention?" "The same thing we've always tried to do," Thomas said. "Build carefully, speak honestly, and use whatever strength we have to protect people who cannot protect themselves, rather than to take what belongs to others. It's a harder path than conquest, in some ways. But it's the one we choose. Far away, in what remained of Kral Dominion space, changes were happening as well, though slower and far less certain. Warlord Dracor Van, once one of the most feared commanders in the Dominion, now held a very different role. The ruling council, shaken by the loss of their great fleet and unwilling to risk provoking humanity again, had placed him in charge of what they called the Office of Outer Relations, a position that had never existed before in Kral history, created only because for the first time, the Dominion needed to learn how to speak with strength rather than simply crush it. It was not an easy transition. Many young Krall warriors, raised entirely on stories of glorious conquest, resented the peace terms and whispered about rebuilding the fleet in secret, about waiting for the right moment to seek revenge against the humans who had humiliated them. Drakor knew about these whispers. He did not silence them by force, the old Krall way. Instead, he called the loudest voices to speak with him directly. "You believe we should fight again," he said to a young officer named Threxa, who had lost her older brother during the battle in Veyron space. "Tell me honestly why." "Because we are Krall," Threxa said, her voice tight with grief and anger. "We do not bow to other species. We do not accept humiliation. My brother died because we underestimated an enemy, and now you ask us to simply accept peace, as though his death meant nothing." Drakor was quiet for a long moment. He understood her pain better than she knew. He had lost friends and warriors he had commanded for decades in those same 4 seconds. "I do not ask you to forget your brother," he said. "I ask you to understand what his death actually taught us. We believed strength alone made us unstoppable. The humans showed us that true strength includes knowing when restraint matters more than victory. They could have erased every living Krall in that fleet, including me. They chose not to. That choice is not weakness, Threxa. It may be the only reason any of us have a future left to fight for, should we ever need to fight for a good reason again." Threxa said nothing, but something in her hard expression softened, just slightly. "I am not asking the Krall Dominion to become weak," Drakor continued. "I am asking us to become wise enough to know the difference between strength used to conquer and strength used to protect. Perhaps, in time, we can learn to build something instead of only taking it from others." It would take many years, Drakor knew, before such words truly changed his people's hearts. But for the first time in Krall history, the conversation had begun, and that alone felt like the start of something new. Back on Earth, in the same underground office where she had once given the order to deploy Battlefleet Sol, Elena Voss stood before the Joint Command Council, delivering her report on the aftermath of the Veyron conflict. "Peace with the Krall Dominion has held for 6 months, she said. Veyron reconstruction continues ahead of schedule. Diplomatic requests from Concordat member species have increased by over 400% since the battle." One of the council members, an older man who had fought in the tail end of the Morvax War as a young soldier, leaned forward. "And how do you feel about all this attention, Admiral? 60 years we spent trying to stay quiet, and now half the galaxy wants to know everything about us." Elena thought about the question carefully before answering. "I think," she said slowly, "that hiding kept us safe while we were weak, and that hiding now would only make us look like we have something to be ashamed of. We don't. We used our strength to save people who had no one else to help them. If the galaxy wants to understand who we are because of that, I think that's a conversation worth having." The old soldier nodded slowly. "Your grandmother would be proud, Elena. She always said the day would come when we wouldn't need to hide anymore." I suppose she was right. Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. She usually was. That evening, Elena Voss stood once more on the observation deck of the Constellation, now docked in orbit above Earth for repairs and resupply. She looked down at the blue and green world below, the same world that had nearly been erased by the Morvax generations ago. The world that had spent 60 quiet years turning fear into strength, and strength into a promise it had finally kept. Her communicator chimed. It was Thomas Reyes, calling from the Concordat station. "How does it feel," he asked, "being the most talked-about admiral in the galaxy?" Elena laughed softly. "Strange. I keep telling everyone we didn't do this for glory." "I know," Thomas said, "but sometimes, doing the right thing quietly is exactly what earns the loudest attention. That's not something we can control. All we can control is what we do with it." Elena looked out at the stars, thinking of Sail Thorn's grateful smile, of Veyron children playing in a fountain, of Warlord Drakor Van's shocked and humbled voice on that first channel after the battle. She thought of her grandmother's old words, carried quietly through 60 years and finally proven true. "We don't go looking for fights," she said softly, more to herself than to Thomas. "But if a fight finds someone we care about, we don't do it halfway." "No," Thomas agreed. "We never will." Far below, Earth turned slowly beneath the stars. no longer a small, hidden world watched by no one, but a home, now known throughout the galaxy as a place that had once nearly been erased, and had chosen, in its darkest hour, to become something better instead, a protector, a friend to those who had none. And, when necessary, a fleet capable of ending a war in less time than it took to draw a single breath. The galaxy would remember the battle in Varen space for a very long time. But for Elena Voss, and for all of humanity, what mattered most was not the fear their strength had caused, but the peace it had finally allowed them to build.